I'm Patricia Tilburg at Davidson College, and I'm delighted to be chairing this fascinating roundtable and this discussion. So we're going to be in a little bit of a different order than was on the program, because we're going to try to proceed chronologically with our discussants speaking a bit, maybe 8 to 10 minutes each, and then we'll have plenty of time for a more free-ranging discussion. So we're going to begin with Nancy Locklin, who received her doctorate from Emory and is a professor of history at Maryville College in Tennessee. She's the author of many publications, of course, most recently the Women and Work Identity essay in Daryl Hafter and Nina Kushner's Women and Work in 18th Century France, and her book, Women's Work and Identity in 18th Century Brittany, came out in 2007. She's currently working on a manuscript entitled Murder, Love, Justice, and Harmony in a pre-revolutionary French village. Please welcome Nancy Locklin.
Good morning. So some of you know a little bit about the school where I teach. I teach Maryville College is a small church-related liberal arts college in the Bible Belt. So you might not be surprised to find that introducing topics of gender and sexuality can be tricky. When I first started working at the college, a colleague told me, "Oh, well, you need to go in there and rattle their cages." And I just thought, that's not me, right? And I think, too, the fact that my students are dealing with a wide range of things. Some are deeply religious. Some come from very sheltered backgrounds. Some have been abused. Some are struggling with their own ideas about gender and sexuality, and some are all of these things at once. So I like to be very caring and nurturing as I approach these topics. In my freshman level family and gender roles in the past class, I wait until the end of the semester, so we've had a lot of time to get to know each other. A lot of them are just getting used to being away from home for the first time, so this is huge. Now, I teach an upper division history class called Medieval Love, where I have all my history majors, and we know each other very well, so I might do this on the first day of class with them. But I take it slower with others. Now, all that having been said, the study of medieval Christian piety is a perfect place to introduce ideas about gender and sexuality, in part because it's the last place my students expect to find it. The French mystics Bernard of Clairvaux and Marguerite Porete are especially compelling sources for the discussion. But I do not teach exclusively French history even in these classes, because I'm one of 4 historians, and I teach everything from Mesopotamia to World War II. So I also, in medieval mystics, like to include the German Beguine Mechtilde von Magdeburg. Her work evokes the strongest reaction among my students. As you'll see, if you don't know it, you'll hear a bit about it here. I'm not going to read long excerpts, although I do have handouts available, a few, if anybody would like to see what the pieces I use. So, starting with Bernard of Clairvaux, he's very well respected, very influential. We know a ton about him and his work. He was influential enough that he was called in to help settle the Great Schism and help choose who should be the true pope in the Great Western Schism. He fought heresy of the Cathars, and he was said to have performed some miracles. Towards the end of his life, he wrote a series of 86 sermons on the Song of Songs, which is, of course, a beautiful love poem, which is, in a number of religious and literary traditions, controversial and, debated. He writes them as this beautiful, and some would say the courtly love tradition of writing about this love affair, this marriage between the soul and Christ, the bride and the bridegroom. In particular, there are some sermons that talk about the joy of the union, the joy of the wedding night, the glowing languor of sleeping in the next day in the beloved's arms. They're very sensual and beautiful. Now, in Bernard's writing, of course, he is part of a tradition in medieval Christianity that sees this love affair as coinciding with and tempered by reason, right? He's very rational. And so that reason accompanies his soul, the bride, in the union with Christ. Margaret Porreet, we know very little about, except from her heresy trial. She wrote a book called The Mirror of Simple Souls, also part of this tradition of courtly love, also about the love between the soul and Christ. But she writes, her writing is, it's also really beautiful, but in a different way, because she takes what Bernard would do and takes it even a step further, right? So her book is a journey where love and reason are accompanying the soul on the journey towards God. And at some point in the middle of this fantastic book, love comes to understand and to teach the soul that only we can go on from this point. We've reached the point where we need to leave reason behind. And they abandon reason as sort of a gate. And then love takes the soul the rest of the journey, because only love can bring you to that union with God. Now, there are a number of things that make her work heretical, which we can get into if you want to. It's very exciting, but of course, all of what we know about her work is from just before they burned her at the stake. Mechthild von Magdeburg is particularly stunning. She is not educated. Now, Margaret Porreet, what little we know about her, her writing indicates that she was probably an elite, and so she would have been at least somewhat educated. Not to the extent of Bernard of Clairvaux, but educated. Whereas Magdeburg is, or Mechthild, I should say, she was not trained. She mostly writes about her own visions, and they are stunning because they are explicit. This is the wedding night. It starts almost with a striptease where God says to the soul, "Why are you clothed? I want you naked." And she says, "Why?" And then later she talks about her feelings for God, and she uses the phrase, it's been often translated in a couple of different ways, but it essentially means my joy, my flowing wetness. Whew. So, the gender issues are apparent in these examples in a number of ways, and my students respond in a lot of ways, but I like to leave it open. I say, what gender issues do you see? And they say, Bernard's soul is a bride? Yes, there's a gender inversion. It has to be, right? Because God, of course, is the male. The bridegroom, of course, is Christ, so the soul must be female. And Bernard then has to figure out how he can be womanly without actually renouncing his masculinity and becoming something lowly like a real woman. And his maleness in real life also protects him and gives him authority in a way that is not even an option for both of these women. In particular, Marguerite, who is burned at the stake, as I said. Mechthild is protected because there is a nunnery that takes her in when she becomes too controversial. Students also talk about then, sort of how their real life genders either protected or left them vulnerable. And maybe, and then they also explore things about why is it that the women are willing to leave behind reason and just embrace not just love but passion in a way that Bernard can't do? And is that a womanly way of knowing, a womanly way of being pious, or is that simply because they didn't have the same university training that he did? These are all questions my students are asking, and I don't have all the answers, but I love that they're thinking. And as for sexuality, I'd like to point out, there's no question, we're not just talking about flowery love, the love of song and poems. We're talking about the wedding night. We're talking about sex. And, the marriage bed is the perfect metaphor for a union with the divine in this context, because that's the only language we have that can express the perfection of this ecstasy. The explicit sensuality of Mechthild's vision emphasizes this part of the union very well, and the students say that this makes them very uncomfortable. And then I can say, why? And they say, well, some of them inevitably say the sex is carnal and sinful and love for God should be pure of this kind of corruption. And then I ask them to consider, is this complete, full, experiential, joyful, nurturing union something that you only reserve for earthly relations and not God? and then they don't know what to say. But they're thinking. Thank you.